I saw something move out there.
What is that? Stay close to me.
We need to keep moving. Stay close to me. Stay right there.
You see anything out there?
Keep up, we're almost there. We have to move now.
I'm still here.
We're almost there.
We need to move quickly.
I'm not leaving you. Just one more thing.
There is something deeply unsettling about the idea that the end of the world might not begin with the destruction of everything. Sometimes, the more frightening possibility is that everything
See anything
remains
out there?
standing. The houses are still there. The road is still there. The lawns, the parked cars,
See right
the
there.
bedrooms filled with familiar possessions, the kitchens where families ate breakfast only hours earlier. None of it has vanished. And yet the world surrounding those things is suddenly gone. That is the nightmare at the center of the end of Oak Street. Its most powerful idea is not simply that prehistoric creatures exist, or that a mysterious cosmic event has carried human beings somewhere they were never meant to go. It is the idea of displacement on a scale so absolute that people may wake up surrounded by everything they recognize while realizing that recognition itself has become almost meaningless. Home is still home, at least physically. But if the sky is wrong, the horizon is wrong, the geography is wrong, and the world beyond the end of the street has become something ancient, hostile, and impossible, then what exactly does the word home mean anymore? That question gives this science fiction adventure its emotional foundation. Long before survival becomes the only priority, before the familiar environment is transformed into a place where every journey outside the front door carries the possibility of danger, the story begins with something far more ordinary. Oak Street is a suburban space, and that detail matters.
Stay right here.
Suburbia has always carried a particular cinematic meaning. It suggests routine,
We should just keep going.
predictability,
We need to move.
privacy. Families build lives around repetition. Mornings, school, work, dinners, neighbors, weekends, arguments that feel important because the larger world seems stable enough to contain them. Even when life inside a family is complicated, the streets outside usually remain where they are supposed to be. The trees do not move overnight. The neighborhood does not disappear into another reality. The world may be difficult, but its basic rules are assumed to remain intact. And that is exactly the assumption this story is interested in destroying. David Robert Mitchell, who wrote and directed the film, builds the premise around a disruption of ordinary reality rather than an escape from it. The characters are not explorers who volunteer to enter a prehistoric wilderness. They are not scientists who knowingly activate a dangerous experiment. They are not adventurers who purchase a ticket toward the unknown. Whatever happens to Oak Street happens to them. Their ordinary environment is violently disconnected from the world they understand, and the terrifying journey begins from the place where they expected to be safest.
We should just keep
That
going.
reversal immediately gives the concept a different emotional texture from a traditional
almost
adventure
there.
story. In many science fiction adventures, the audience follows characters into strange territory. Here, strange territory comes to the characters by taking away the larger reality around them. There is no clean dividing line between civilization and wilderness because civilization itself has apparently been carried into the wilderness. The houses, roads, possessions, and family histories
anything out
associated with suburban life become fragments of one world stranded inside another. And at the center of that impossible transformation is the Platt family. The decision to anchor such a large-scale premise in a family is crucial. Cosmic events can be visually spectacular, but spectacle alone cannot explain what it
Just one more
feels
thing.
like to lose the world. A family can. Within a family, survival is never merely an individual problem. Every decision immediately becomes complicated by responsibility. An adult may be willing to take a risk for information, but what happens when children are involved? Someone may want to remain inside the relative security of home, while someone else understands that waiting may become more dangerous than leaving. Fear itself can become divisive because different people respond to uncertainty in different ways. The Platts therefore matter not simply because the story needs recognizable protagonists, but because a family provides the emotional structure through which this enormous premise can become personal. Denise and Greg, played by Anne Hathaway and Ewan McGregor, stand at the center of that structure, while the younger members of the family experience the same catastrophe from perspectives that cannot be identical to those of the adults. The generational difference is important. Adults carry memories of the world before the event. They understand, perhaps more
Just one more
clearly than
thing.
their children, the full scale of what has been lost. They know what electricity means when it is available. They know the role of emergency services, institutions, transportation, communication, and the invisible systems that make ordinary life feel normal. Children may understand the immediate terror, but adults understand the collapse behind it. That difference can make responsibility almost unbearable. One of the most interesting things about a premise like this is the way an extraordinary crisis exposes ordinary emotional tensions. Before the universe decides to become impossible, a family already has a history. There are disagreements, insecurities, habits, misunderstandings, expectations, and fears that have nothing to do with dinosaurs or cosmic displacement. Extreme circumstances do not erase those things. If anything, they magnify them.
Just one more
The
thing.
person who is used to making decisions may suddenly discover that certainty has disappeared. The person who depends on others may be forced toward independence. A child who once seemed vulnerable may react with unexpected curiosity or resilience, while an adult who appeared strong in ordinary circumstances may find that strength much harder to perform when there is no longer any reliable authority to turn to. That is where the survival story begins to become more than a monster movie. Because monsters are easy to identify. A creature appears, and instinct tells you to run. The more complicated danger comes from uncertainty.
Stay right
What
there.
do you do when you do not know where you are? What do you do when there is no reliable map, no clear explanation, and perhaps no way of knowing whether help exists? What if the neighborhood itself is no longer connected to the systems that once supported it? How long can food last? What happens when power fails? What happens when communication with the outside world becomes impossible, not because the signal is weak, but because the outside world, as the characters knew it, may no longer be accessible at all? Those questions turn ordinary objects into survival resources. A house is no longer simply a house. It may be shelter, storage, a defensive position, or eventually a trap. A road is no longer a route between familiar destinations. It becomes a dangerous line leading toward information, or toward something waiting beyond sight. A backyard fence, once a symbol of privacy, suddenly feels absurdly fragile against a world containing creatures from an age in which humans did not exist. The central irony is impossible to ignore. The more familiar Oak Street remains visually, the stranger and more frightening its situation becomes. If the entire neighborhood had simply been destroyed, the characters would immediately understand the scale of their loss. But a street transported intact into an unrecognizable environment creates a far more disturbing contradiction. Every house becomes evidence of a vanished normality. Every personal possession becomes a reminder of a life whose continuity can no longer be assumed. The ordinary world survives as an artifact, and there is something almost archaeological about that image. Human civilization is suddenly the ancient
Keep up, we're
object.
almost there.
The Platts and their neighbors become people living inside a fragment of a world that may now be as distant from its original context as the prehistoric life surrounding them. That reversal gives the presence of dinosaurs and other ancient threats a symbolic force beyond simple spectacle. Prehistoric creatures have always fascinated cinema, partly because they represent a past too vast for ordinary human imagination. They remind us that the planet existed for ages before us and will continue beyond our individual lives. Modern civilization can create skyscrapers, satellites, highways, and digital networks, but none of those things erase the deeper history of the Earth. Putting ancient life beside suburban homes collapses time itself. A creature associated with extinction suddenly becomes more physically present than the systems of modern civilization. The telephone may be useless. Institutions may be unreachable. The future may be impossible to predict. But something from the distant past is alive, immediate, and dangerous. That collision between eras is where the film's science fiction and adventure identity becomes
anything out
particularly
there?
distinctive. The story is not simply asking the audience to imagine dinosaurs in the modern world. It is presenting modernity itself as vulnerable. The familiar world is not necessarily protected by its technological sophistication because the catastrophe attacks the framework beneath that sophistication. Once the characters lose predictable geography and the certainty of their surroundings, technology can only help to the extent that the systems supporting it still exist. The suburban fantasy of control begins to collapse. And perhaps that is what makes the mysterious cosmic event more frightening than a conventional invasion. An invasion has an enemy. A disaster has a visible force. A monster can be studied. But a disruption of reality raises questions that may not have immediate answers. Where has Oak Street gone? What caused the displacement? Is this another planet, another time, another dimension, or something even more difficult to understand? Are the prehistoric creatures native to this environment? Are they evidence of a world existing outside ordinary human knowledge? Or are they connected to the same impossible event that transformed the neighborhood? The mystery does not merely surround the story. It becomes part of the environment. Every unanswered question changes the way the characters interpret what they see. A strange landscape is not simply strange scenery. It may contain clues. A creature is not merely a threat. Its existence challenges everything the characters believed about where and when they are. Even the act of looking outward becomes dangerous because knowledge itself may require exposure. That is an important source of suspense. A traditional creature feature often creates tension through anticipation. The audience knows something is nearby, but the characters do not. A story built around cosmic uncertainty can add another layer. The characters may see the danger and still not understand what seeing it means. The first realization that reality has changed, therefore, carries enormous dramatic potential. At the beginning, human beings naturally search for explanations that preserve the old world. There must be a rational reason. There must be an emergency. There must be another neighborhood somewhere nearby, another authority, another piece of evidence that can reconnect the impossible situation to something understandable. But eventually, the available explanations begin to collapse. And that moment, the moment when denial can no longer protect the mind, is often more frightening than the danger itself. Imagine what it means emotionally for a family to understand that the impossible is not temporary in the ordinary sense. A storm passes. A power outage ends. An emergency service arrives. A damaged road can be repaired. But what system repairs reality? Where do you call when the neighborhood has been removed from the world? The Platts are therefore confronted with a problem that cannot immediately be solved through expertise alone. Intelligence matters. Courage matters. Practical survival skills matter. But before any of those things can become useful, the family has to accept the possibility that they are facing something beyond every familiar category. This is where Denise and Greg's narrative function becomes especially important. In a family-centered survival story, adults are expected to create safety. Children are taught, directly or indirectly, that parents know what to do when something goes wrong. But a cosmic event of this scale destroys that comforting illusion. Parents can still protect. They can still make decisions. They can still offer reassurance. Yet they are also frightened people standing inside the same impossible mystery. The pressure comes from having to act before understanding. That may be the most difficult form of leadership. Anyone can wait for certainty and make a decision afterward. Survival demands choices when certainty is unavailable. Stay inside or explore. Trust the apparent safety of familiar structures or abandon them before they become dangerous. work with neighbors, or worry about the instability that fear can create among a larger group. Preserve supplies for the future when no one knows how long the crisis will last,
We're almost there.
or use them now because tomorrow itself has become uncertain. Every practical question carries an emotional cost, and the children complicate those choices in ways that go beyond vulnerability. Younger people can represent curiosity as much as fear. Adults understand loss through comparison with the past, while children may adapt to the present with a speed that is both useful and
See
heartbreaking.
anything out there?
Growing up during a crisis means discovering that the rules of childhood can disappear without warning. Home is supposed to be the boundary between the dangerous outside world and personal safety. Once danger surrounds home, childhood itself changes. The family must confront the possibility that protection can no longer mean preventing fear. It may instead mean teaching one another how to continue despite it. That shift gives the adventure its emotional weight. The prehistoric creatures, meanwhile, are most effective when understood as part of the larger violation of
We have
certainty.
to move now.
Dinosaurs are not frightening only because they are large or capable of killing. Their presence is terrifying because they should not be there. Human beings have organized their understanding of the world around assumptions about time. Some things belong to the past. Some things belong to museums. Extinction is supposed to be permanent. Now the past is moving outside, and the suburban environment makes that image more powerful than an isolated jungle setting ever could. A prehistoric creature moving through wilderness belongs to a recognizable adventure tradition. A prehistoric creature appearing near a house, a road, or a backyard forces two incompatible visual worlds together. One represents domestic routine. The other represents a time before domestic routine was possible. The contrast is almost absurd until it becomes frightening. That is where the production design concept becomes central to the experience. The survival environment is not an entirely invented futuristic landscape disconnected from the characters' lives. The familiar architecture of suburbia remains part of the visual language. Houses and roads carry memories. The audience understands how these spaces were supposed to function before they become dangerous. A kitchen was a place for food. A bedroom was a place for sleep. A street was a place to travel through without imagining that something ancient might emerge from beyond the visible world. Once those meanings change, every familiar location can generate suspense. A house may still look comforting while no longer providing comfort. Silence may stop feeling peaceful because silence can mean that something is listening. Distance may become terrifying because the characters cannot know what exists beyond the horizon. Even daylight does not necessarily guarantee safety. One of the enduring strengths of creature-driven adventure is the way it can make the act of observation itself suspenseful. The audience begins to scan the frame, not merely watching the characters, but searching the spaces around them. What is moving? What is hidden? What does the family fail to notice? Mitchell's background in unsettling genre storytelling makes the importance of atmosphere particularly relevant to how one can approach this premise. The story's public concept invites comparison, in broad terms, with traditions of suburban science fiction and uncanny family horror. Stories in which the safest-looking environments become unstable because an incomprehensible force has entered ordinary life. There are echoes of the kind of imagination associated with the Twilight Zone, where a familiar situation can suddenly reveal a terrifying new rule. There are also connections to family-centered supernatural and science fiction traditions in which the home becomes the first battlefield, and to Spielberg-era adventure storytelling, where wonder and terror can exist in the same image. But those comparisons are useful only because of what they reveal about the central tension. The strange is more powerful when it enters somewhere familiar. A distant planet is expected to be alien. Oak Street is not. At least, it was not supposed to be. The title itself begins to take on a larger meaning from that perspective. The end of Oak Street does not simply sound like a geographical location. It suggests termination, a boundary, the end of something ordinary. Perhaps the most frightening place in the world is no longer the distant horizon, but the point where the familiar street stops and the unknown begins. A child growing up in a suburban neighborhood can believe that the road continues into an understandable world. There are other streets, other houses, stores, schools, cities. Civilization extends outward. But what happens when the end of the street is literally the end of the known world? That image captures the film's underlying existential fear. Civilization often feels permanent because individuals experience only a tiny portion of history. Streets are built before us and seem likely to remain after us. Houses pass from one family to another. Institutions survive personal crises. Routine creates the illusion that tomorrow is guaranteed to resemble today. The cosmic event destroys that illusion in an instant, and when the illusion disappears, the Platt family is forced to discover what remains underneath it. Not reputation, not routine, not professional identity in the usual sense, not the comfort of knowing that a larger system will eventually intervene. What remains is relationship. Fear can isolate people, but survival may require connection. Trust becomes a resource. Responsibility becomes a burden that cannot be abandoned. Leadership becomes less about confidence than about the willingness to keep moving when confidence is impossible. Family unity stops being a sentimental idea and becomes something practical, fragile, and constantly tested. That does not mean the story needs to pretend that love automatically solves every problem. In fact, the more honest approach is to recognize that pressure can expose fractures. A family in danger may argue more, not less. People can blame one another because blame gives chaos a temporary shape. Someone may demand answers that no one possesses. Someone else may want to take action simply because doing nothing feels intolerable. The emotional question is whether the family can remain connected while accepting that each person experiences the crisis differently. And that is where the story's early progression becomes especially important. Before the characters can become seasoned survivors, they have to pass through disbelief. The ordinary world does not disappear emotionally at the same speed that it disappears physically. The mind continues reaching backward. Surely this can be fixed. Surely someone knows something. Surely there is a boundary beyond which normality continues. But the signs of change keep accumulating. The environment no longer behaves as expected. The familiar neighborhood becomes an island of human normality, surrounded by evidence that normality has ended. The threat of prehistoric life makes the situation impossible to dismiss as a simple natural disaster. Each new discovery pushes the characters further away from rational explanations that preserve the world they once knew. And eventually there comes the terrible realization that survival may require abandoning the question of why, at least for now. The question becomes what next? That is the point at which the adventure truly begins. Until then, the mystery has been expanding around the Platts. Their world has become less recognizable with every sign that the old rules no longer apply. But survival stories cannot remain in disbelief forever. At some point, food must be found, safety must be assessed, boundaries must be tested. The family has to decide whether remaining within the familiar outline of Oak Street offers protection or merely delays an encounter with a danger that is already closing in. The tragedy is that the place they know best may no longer be capable of keeping them alive. And that realization changes the meaning of every door. For most of their lives, opening the front door would have meant stepping into the world they understood. Neighbors, pavement,
One more
cars,
thing.
weather, ordinary distance. Now the same action carries the possibility of crossing from the last fragment of human familiarity into an environment governed by rules they do not know. The door is still the same. The world beyond it is not. That is the unsettling brilliance of the premise. The catastrophe does not require the complete destruction of Oak Street to make Oak Street unrecognizable.
Move out there.
It only needs to remove the context that gave the place its meaning. A suburban
See
street
anything out
without the surrounding civilization becomes something else entirely. It becomes a settlement, a refuge, a relic, a possible trap, a tiny surviving piece of one reality stranded inside another. And somewhere beyond the limits of that familiar pavement, something ancient is alive. Something that does not care who the Platts were before this happened. Something that does not understand their schedules, their responsibilities, their arguments, or the systems they once depended upon. The family can carry the memory of the old world with them, but memory cannot protect them from a creature they may not see coming.
I'm still here.
The rules have changed, and the first lesson of this new existence is brutal in its simplicity. Being home is no longer the same thing as being safe. So as the mystery deepens and the evidence becomes impossible to ignore, the Platts stand at the edge of a decision they never asked to make. Behind them is the last visible shape of the life they understood. Ahead of them is a landscape that turns every question into another danger. They still have their street. They still have their houses. For the moment, they still have one another. But the world has moved on without them, or perhaps they are the ones who have been moved beyond it. And as the first true scale of their situation begins to emerge, Oak Street stops feeling like the beginning of a journey home. It becomes the place from which survival must begin. And once survival begins, the meaning of the unknown changes completely. Mystery is fascinating when it exists at a distance. Human beings can spend hours debating what may be hidden beyond the horizon when they are standing safely inside a world that provides food, shelter, electricity, communication, and some expectation that tomorrow will resemble today. But mystery becomes something else when the horizon surrounds you. When there is nowhere familiar to retreat to, unanswered questions stop being intellectual puzzles and become immediate threats. That is where the journey of the Platt family moves after the first terrible realization that Oak Street is no longer part of the world they knew. The emotional shock cannot last forever, even though the situation remains incomprehensible. Hunger will eventually interrupt panic. Darkness will arrive whether anyone is ready for it or not. Supplies will have to be counted. Shelter will have to be evaluated. The people trapped within this displaced fragment of suburbia will have to decide who takes responsibility, who investigates, who remains behind, and how much of their old life can actually help them survive the new one.
Almost there.
The most frightening transformation is therefore not only geographical, it is psychological. The family has to stop thinking like people waiting for rescue and begin thinking like people who may have to rescue themselves. That shift is enormous because the old world trained them to depend on systems they rarely had to notice. If a person became sick, there were hospitals. If danger appeared, there were emergency services. If someone got lost, maps and communication networks could help them find their way back. Food came from stores connected to supply chains so vast that most people never considered how fragile those chains might be. Water, power, transportation, information. Ordinary life was supported by countless invisible structures. Now the invisible has become visible through its absence. A suburban house may contain food, tools, medicine, batteries, and other resources, but it was never designed to function as an isolated survival base indefinitely. Its usefulness depends on a world outside its walls continuing to exist. The refrigerator matters because electricity exists. A car matters because there are roads leading somewhere, and fuel can eventually be replaced.
Close to me.
A phone matters because there is someone, somewhere, to call. The cosmic displacement attacks the assumption behind all of these things. Suddenly, the possessions that once represented comfort have to be judged according to necessity. What can be carried? What can be protected? What can still function? The family is surrounded by the remains of ordinary abundance, yet abundance can become strangely meaningless when there is no certainty about the future. That is one of the most compelling survival ideas within the premise. Civilization does not disappear all at once. Its objects remain. Its habits remain. Its memories remain. What disappears is the guarantee that those things can continue serving their original purpose. A kitchen can still look like a kitchen while becoming a supply room. A garage can become storage, shelter, or a place to search for anything useful enough to matter outside the boundaries of normal life. A child's possessions can become reminders of how quickly innocence has been interrupted. The domestic environment is still physically present, but its emotional meaning is constantly changing. And with every change, the family is forced to confront a difficult truth. They cannot preserve the old world simply by remaining inside its buildings. The threat outside does not disappear because they refuse to look at it. This is where the adventure element begins to grow out of the science fiction premise. Exploration is no longer motivated by curiosity alone. Information becomes a survival resource. The Platts and the people around them need to understand their surroundings because ignorance has consequences. Is there water? Are there safer areas beyond the neighborhood? What kind of creatures inhabit this environment? Is Oak Street completely isolated, or are there other signs of human life? Is there any evidence that the cosmic event can be understood, reversed, or survived? Every question creates a reason to move, but moving means exposure. That contradiction is essential to the tension. Staying put may feel safer because home represents familiarity, yet familiarity itself may be deceptive. A house cannot protect against every threat. Supplies diminish. A hostile environment may change around the survivors. Remaining passive can become its own form of danger. At the same time, venturing outward means leaving behind the only territory whose physical layout they understand. The road that once connected the Platts to ordinary destinations now becomes a line between knowledge and danger. And there is something especially unsettling about seeing suburban space through this new survival perspective. Streets are designed to make movement easy. Sidewalks and driveways are evidence of human control over the environment. Lawns separate houses from one another. Fences establish boundaries. The entire visual organization of a neighborhood quietly tells its residents that this is human territory. But those boundaries become almost meaningless when the surrounding world belongs to something older and more dangerous. A fence cannot explain the rules of the wilderness. A streetlight cannot create safety if there is no reliable power. A paved road does not guarantee civilization at the other end. Human beings may have constructed Oak Street, but they no longer control the world in which Oak Street exists. That reversal gives the prehistoric environment a special power. Dinosaurs and other ancient creatures remain potent cinematic symbols because they represent nature at a scale that ignores human assumptions. They are reminders that humanity is not the default center of the planet. In a conventional modern setting, people can forget that. Cities, technology, and infrastructure create an illusion that the natural world has been organized into manageable categories. Wildlife belongs somewhere else. Extinct creatures belong in museums. Danger is something that can be predicted, regulated, or kept at a distance. Here, the categories collapse. The extinct is alive. The wilderness is surrounding suburbia. and the supposedly advanced modern world is suddenly the vulnerable intruder. That visual contradiction is arguably one of the strongest aspects of the film's concept. A prehistoric creature in a prehistoric landscape is impressive. A prehistoric creature existing in visual proximity to the symbols of contemporary domestic life carries another kind of meaning. It creates a collision between different understandings of time. The lawn belongs to the present. The creature belongs to the distant past. The house was built around assumptions about the future. But all three now occupy the same immediate reality. Time itself begins to feel unstable. The characters cannot simply ask how they got from one location to another, because the transformation appears larger than ordinary geography. The very existence of ancient life forces them to question what kind of world they have entered. Is the environment another place, another reality, or something that cannot be comfortably described through any single category? The uncertainty matters because the story does not immediately reduce its mystery to a convenient explanation, and that can be one of its greatest strengths. Science fiction often works best when the unknown remains meaningful before it becomes understandable. If every mystery is explained too quickly, the characters can begin behaving as though they are solving a technical problem. But the horror of Oak Street's displacement comes partly from the fact that no one initially possesses a reliable instruction manual for reality. The survivors can observe patterns. They can make decisions based on danger. They can test assumptions. Yet the larger question remains suspended over everything they do. Why did this happen? And perhaps even more frighteningly, why them? There is an instinctive human need to believe that catastrophe follows a pattern. If there is a cause, perhaps there is a solution. If there is a reason, perhaps someone can avoid repeating the mistake. But a cosmic event that appears to transform reality itself introduces the possibility that the characters may not be the targets of anything. They may simply be caught inside a force too large to care about them. That possibility strips the situation of comforting logic. The Platt family cannot necessarily negotiate with the unknown. They cannot assume that courage will make the mystery reveal itself. They may survive one danger only to discover another, because survival does not mean understanding. This is what separates the story's atmosphere from a straightforward adventure in which every obstacle leads neatly toward an answer. Here, each discovery can make the larger mystery even bigger, and that produces a particular emotional rhythm. The audience wants information, but information may come at a cost. A safer understanding of the environment may require traveling farther from Oak Street. Learning what creatures exist may mean encountering them. Searching for signs of another world may expose the family to the dangers of the current one. Knowledge is necessary, but curiosity can be fatal. That is where the family dynamic becomes more important under pressure. In an ordinary household, disagreement may be frustrating but manageable because the consequences are limited. In a survival situation, every disagreement can feel like a conflict over life itself. One person may believe that caution is the only sensible response. Another may believe that caution has become paralysis. One adult may focus on immediate protection, while another recognizes that protecting the family in the long term requires taking risks now. Neither position is automatically wrong. That is what makes the emotional conflict potentially more interesting than simple arguments designed to create drama. The situation can make opposing instincts understandable. Fear can produce recklessness as easily as cowardice. Love can produce overprotection. Responsibility can become controlling. The desire to keep a family safe can conflict with the need to allow individual members to contribute, adapt, and grow. Denise and Greg therefore function within a crisis that does not offer ideal decisions. Their responsibility is not simply to look brave in front of their children. It is to make choices without pretending that certainty exists. The collapse of the old world places pressure on every traditional family role. What does it mean to protect someone when protection itself is limited? How honest should adults be with children when the truth is terrifying? Can reassurance still matter when no one knows where the help is coming? The answer may lie less in pretending to possess control and more in preserving trust. That is why family unity in this kind of story should not be confused with everyone agreeing. Unity becomes meaningful precisely because agreement is difficult. People may be frightened, angry, exhausted, and uncertain. They may interpret danger differently. But if the Platts are to survive, they have to discover ways of remaining connected even when the old routines that held them together have vanished. The younger characters bring another emotional dimension to that process. A crisis of this scale does not simply threaten their physical safety. It changes the meaning of growing up. Adults can remember what was lost. Children may have to learn who they are in a world where normal development has been interrupted by survival. Vulnerability is therefore only one part of their role. Curiosity can become equally important. A child may notice something adults overlook because adults are trapped inside their expectations about how reality should behave. Younger minds may be more willing to accept the impossible once the evidence becomes undeniable. But that openness can also become dangerous. Curiosity encourages exploration, and exploration in this environment may reveal the very threats everyone else hopes to avoid. The tension between curiosity and caution is woven naturally into the concept of prehistoric danger. Ancient creatures are terrifying, but they are also astonishing. The human response to the impossible is rarely pure fear. Wonder can exist beside terror. Seeing something that should not exist may produce the instinct to look closer, even when every rational impulse says to stay away. That mixture of wonder and dread is part of the long tradition of adventure cinema the story enters. The most memorable family adventures often understand that spectacle is emotionally complicated. The audience wants to see the impossible, but the characters have to live with it. A gigantic creature can inspire awe at the same moment it threatens destruction. An unknown landscape can appear beautiful because it is untouched by familiar civilization, while remaining terrifying because the characters do not know how to survive within it. The visual scale can therefore create both attraction and fear. This is where cinematography and production design become more than decorative achievements. The premise depends heavily on contrast. The audience needs to feel the difference between what Oak Street was and what surrounds it now. Familiar architecture can become visually fragile when framed against a much larger, stranger environment. A house that once seemed substantial may look tiny against an alien horizon. A road can become absurdly narrow when it leads toward a landscape beyond human understanding. Scale changes emotion. The camera's relationship to the environment can determine whether the audience feels temporarily secure with the family or exposed alongside them. Close framing can trap viewers inside the immediate fear of the characters. Wider images can reveal how small human beings have become within a world that does not belong to them. The contrast between intimate family spaces and enormous environmental uncertainty gives the story room to move between emotional closeness and adventure spectacle. But the strongest moments of suspense may not require the largest images. Sometimes the most frightening thing is what the frame refuses to show. A sound beyond the house. Movement at the edge of visibility. An empty stretch of road that seems too quiet. A pause in conversation when everyone suddenly realizes that something outside has changed. Creature features have long understood that anticipation can be more powerful than immediate exposure. The imagination can populate darkness with possibilities more frightening than anything revealed too quickly. In a story where the characters do not understand the environment, withholding information becomes especially effective because the audience shares their uncertainty.
Move now.
What made that sound? How far away is it? Is it alone? Does it know the humans are there? And perhaps the most important question, what happens when there is nowhere to run? Oak Street itself can become a trap because it is recognizable. The survivors know its houses and roads, but the creatures do not need to respect those human boundaries. Familiarity can create false confidence. A person knows where a backyard ends, but that knowledge does not matter if danger can enter from beyond the fence. Someone knows which house belongs to a neighbor, but the identity of the neighbor provides no protection against the world outside. The ordinary map remains in the mind even after it stops corresponding to reality. That psychological delay can be devastating. Human beings adapt slowly to the loss of certainty because routine becomes part of identity. The Platts cannot instantly transform into experienced survivors just because circumstances demand it. They bring their previous selves into the crisis. Their fears, habits, expectations, and emotional relationships travel with them. That is what gives the survival premise a potentially human scale. The characters do not begin as experts in an adventure. They begin as people whose lives have been interrupted by one, and the surrounding residents matter for the same reason. A neighborhood is already a small social system. There are people who know one another closely and people who merely exchange greetings. There may be existing tensions, differences in personality, competing instincts, and unequal abilities. Under ordinary conditions, those differences are manageable because everyone has the larger social world to fall back on. Under extreme isolation, the neighborhood itself becomes a survival community that can create another level of danger. People, not necessarily because everyone becomes a villain, but because fear changes social behavior. Resources create anxiety. Leadership becomes contested. Information becomes valuable. Rumors can spread faster than facts. One person's attempt to protect their family can appear selfish to another person. The collapse of institutions forces people to build temporary systems from whatever trust remains. Who decides when the group moves? Who takes responsibility if a decision goes wrong? How much should be shared? Can anyone truly know what the safest option is? These questions expand the story beyond the Platt family without taking away its emotional center. Oak Street is no longer merely a collection of private homes. The disappearance of the larger world forces the residents to confront one another as members of a community whose survival may depend on cooperation. But cooperation becomes difficult when everyone is afraid. That is one of the reasons the cosmic event functions so effectively as a science fiction disruption. It does not simply introduce monsters. It removes context. Modern society relies on enormous networks of trust that individuals rarely think about. People expect laws to exist, authorities to respond, food to arrive, information to circulate. When those expectations vanish, even small decisions become uncertain. The story can therefore be understood as a thought experiment about how much of civilization exists inside the human mind. The houses remain. The street remains. But does a neighborhood remain a neighborhood when the society around it has disappeared? The answer depends on what the people trapped there choose to become. This is also where the film's mystery carries one of its possible weaknesses. Ambiguity can generate suspense, but it has limits. The audience needs to feel that the uncertainty is leading somewhere emotionally or dramatically. If unanswered questions merely multiply without deepening the characters or changing the stakes, mystery can begin to feel like withholding rather than storytelling. The strongest use of ambiguity is not necessarily to explain everything. It is to make the
I
absence
saw
of
something about
explanation meaningful. For the Platts, not knowing where they are changes how they behave.
See anything out there?
Not understanding the cosmic event changes what risks they are willing to take. Not knowing whether rescue is possible affects how they organize for survival. The mystery earns its place when uncertainty actively shapes the story. Still, there is a delicate balance. A concept this ambitious naturally creates enormous questions, and the larger the premise becomes, the more the audience may want the narrative to establish some sense of internal direction. The danger is that mystery can become so dominant that emotional momentum weakens. A survival adventure needs movement. It needs discoveries, choices, consequences, and a sense that the characters are not simply waiting for the screenplay to reveal its secrets. That balance between explanation and experience is one of the most important challenges facing a story like this.
I saw something.
Fortunately, the premise contains a powerful source of forward momentum. The world itself must
See
be
anything out
explored.
there?
The family cannot understand Oak Street's new existence by looking only at the front lawns. At some
Stay right
point,
there.
the boundaries of the known have to be tested, and every movement beyond those boundaries transforms the nature of the story. The opening fear was based on realization. Now fear becomes practical. What is safe to touch? Where can they go? What creatures inhabit the area? What signs might indicate another human presence? Can the environment provide what the neighborhood cannot? Each step outward is both an adventure and a gamble.
I'm still
That is
here.
where the prehistoric setting becomes more than a visual gimmick. Ancient life represents an environment with its own hierarchy, rhythms, and dangers. Human beings are not automatically at the top of that hierarchy simply because they come from a technologically advanced civilization. If the systems supporting that civilization have been cut away, then intelligence must adapt to circumstances rather than dominate them. The family is forced to become observers. They have to learn before they can control anything, and learning can require humility. That may be one of the deeper ideas hidden inside
right
the
here.
collision between suburbia and prehistory. Modern life encourages people to believe that the environment has been
just keep
mastered.
going.
Roads are built through landscapes. Homes separate residents from weather and wildlife. Food is packaged. Time is organized. Nature
I'm
exists,
not leaving you.
but it is often experienced through controlled spaces. Now control has been removed. The Platts have not chosen to return to an earlier stage of human existence, yet survival pushes them toward more basic questions. Where is shelter? Where is water?
Keep up,
What
we're
is
almost there.
dangerous? Whom can we trust? How do we protect the people we love? The answers cannot be downloaded from the vanished world. They have to be discovered. And every discovery threatens to expose another weakness. That is why the first stages of survival can be more emotionally compelling than immediate mastery. A character who quickly becomes capable may be satisfying to watch, but the sense of danger is strongest when competence has to be earned. The family does not need to become invincible for the adventure to move forward. In fact, their vulnerability is essential. The audience should feel that every success is temporary, every shelter imperfect, every plan dependent on information they do not yet
almost there.
possess. The prehistoric creatures intensify that vulnerability because they exist outside human expectations. A predator does not care about the emotional significance of Oak Street. It does not understand that a particular house contains a family trying desperately to preserve what remains of their life. From the creature's perspective, human civilization may be irrelevant. That indifference
anything
is
out there?
frightening. It transforms the environment from a stage built for human drama into a world that continues according to rules beyond human control. And somewhere within that world, the Platts must decide how far they are willing to go.
Still here.
The old instinct says to stay close together, preserve what remains, and wait for the impossible
Just
to
one more
become
thing.
understandable. But waiting has its own dangers. The family needs answers. The neighborhood needs resources. The mystery surrounding the cosmic event cannot remain completely outside their actions if there is any possibility that understanding it could reveal a path toward survival. So the direction of the story begins to shift. The displaced street is no longer only a symbol of what has been lost. It becomes a base from which the unknown must be confronted. That changes the emotional meaning of home once again. At first, home was the thing the characters believed they had
I saw
lost.
something move out there.
Then it became the fragile remnant they hoped could protect them. Now it may become the place they have to leave in order to have any chance of preserving it. And that is the cruel paradox at the heart of the adventure. To save what they love, they may have to walk away from it. To understand the world that has replaced their own, they may have to enter the very environment they fear. To protect one another, they may eventually have to trust one another with responsibilities no one was prepared to carry. The world beyond Oak Street is becoming clearer only in the most terrifying sense. Not because the mystery has been solved, but because its dangers are becoming impossible to deny. Something happened. Something vast enough to tear a familiar neighborhood away from everything surrounding it. Something that has placed ordinary human beings beside forms of life that belong to a distant past. And whatever rules govern this new reality, the Platt family
See
has
anything
not
out
yet
there?
learned them. For now, they can only watch, listen, adapt, and move carefully through a world where every new horizon may contain another answer, or another creature. The first shock of losing reality has passed. What comes next is harder. Now they have to survive it. And surviving it means accepting that caution alone cannot carry them forward forever. There comes a point in every story about people trapped inside the unknown when remaining alive and actually finding a way to continue become two different problems. The Platt family has reached that point. Oak Street may still offer the outline of shelter, but an outline is not the same as security. The street cannot explain where they are. It cannot guarantee resources. It cannot tell them whether the creatures surrounding this fragment of human civilization are temporary visitors or permanent inhabitants of a world from which there may be no easy return. The question is no longer simply how to stay alive until morning. It is how to build a future when the future has lost its shape. That is where the adventure becomes more demanding. The early stages of the crisis were defined by shock, observation, and the painful effort to recognize that reality had changed. Now the characters are forced
right
toward action. Information has to be pursued rather than awaited. The boundaries around Oak Street have to be tested. What initially looked like an impossible interruption of ordinary life begins to reveal itself as a larger environment with patterns, dangers, distances, and perhaps clues that the survivors cannot afford to ignore.
Not leaving you.
But exploration changes the nature of fear. Inside a house, the imagination creates threats in the darkness. Outside, those threats acquire scale. The family is no longer protected by the comforting illusion that danger exists somewhere beyond the
Keep up, we're
neighborhood.
almost there.
Danger is the neighborhood's new context. Every journey outward becomes an encounter with a world that has no obligation to accommodate human beings. The Platts can bring intelligence, memory, and the remnants of modern knowledge with them, but they cannot bring the systems that once made that knowledge feel powerful. Their situation reduces survival to something more immediate: observation, adaptation, judgment, and trust. And trust becomes especially fragile once decisions begin to carry consequences. A family can agree that something must be done while disagreeing completely about what that something is. One person may believe the greatest danger lies in moving too quickly. Another may become convinced that delay will destroy them. Neither fear is irrational. The environment offers too little certainty for anyone to claim complete confidence. That uncertainty makes leadership less glamorous and more painful. Someone has to decide. And the person who decides has to live with what follows. For Denise and Greg, that pressure changes the emotional meaning of parenthood. In the ordinary
See anything
world,
out there?
parents can prepare for dangers without confronting every danger directly. They teach children caution. They provide routines. They create rules that exist because the world around the family is expected to remain understandable. But what happens when the adults cannot explain the rules anymore?
Just one more
The
thing.
authority of parenthood is suddenly tested by honesty. It is one thing to tell a child that everything will be all right when you believe you understand the emergency. It is another thing entirely when you are looking into an impossible landscape and realizing that you do not know what comes next. The stronger emotional approach is not to imagine the adults becoming fearless heroes overnight. Fear does not disappear because responsibility demands courage. If anything, responsibility makes fear more intense. Denise and Greg have more to lose because they are not thinking only about themselves. Every risk can be measured against the people they love. Every discovery creates another question. Is this information worth the danger required to obtain it? That is the cruel mathematics of survival. There are no perfect choices. There are only choices made with incomplete knowledge. And the children experience those choices from the opposite side. Their safety depends on adults who are themselves struggling to understand the situation. That can accelerate emotional growth in ways that are both inspiring and sad. A child who begins to recognize the seriousness of the crisis can no longer remain entirely outside the family's decisions. Survival may force younger characters to become observant, useful, and resilient before they are emotionally ready. Yet the story should not reduce them to miniature adults. Their perspective matters precisely because they are still connected to wonder. Adults may see a prehistoric creature and immediately calculate danger. Younger characters may experience the same sight through a mixture of terror and amazement. Something impossible has entered their reality, and before fear fully organizes that experience, there can be fascination. That fascination is not foolishness.
Stay right here.
It is part of what makes human beings respond to the unknown in the first place. Wonder can lead to discovery. It can also lead someone too close to danger. That tension becomes one of the natural engines of the adventure. The prehistoric world is frightening because it contains creatures capable of overwhelming human beings, but it is also visually and emotionally extraordinary. The audience is invited to feel what the characters cannot afford to indulge for long. The awe of witnessing something that should exist only in imagination, fossils, museums, and scientific reconstruction. The story's challenge is to keep that awe from cancelling the danger. The creatures must remain creatures with their own presence, rather than simply becoming attractions placed between plot points. A survival adventure loses tension when spectacle becomes too comfortable. The strongest approach is to allow the audience to be fascinated while constantly reminding them that fascination does not create safety. A beautiful or astonishing sight can still kill you. That idea belongs to the deepest traditions of adventure cinema. Nature is not frightening only when it is ugly. A mountain can be magnificent and deadly. An ocean can be beautiful and merciless.
Just keep going.
An unknown world can inspire wonder at the same moment it makes human beings realize how small they are. The environment surrounding Oak Street can operate in exactly that way. Its scale challenges the suburban perspective the characters brought with them. On an ordinary street, human beings understand distance through practical experience. The corner is close. The school is a certain number of minutes away. A road connects one familiar location to another.
See anything
But
out there?
outside the known world, distance becomes abstract. The horizon could conceal anything. A journey that appears short may become dangerous because the terrain changes, because visibility changes, or because the characters encounter forms of life they do not understand. The world is not mapped according to their
One more
needs.
thing.
That is why every major discovery carries two effects at once. It may provide information, but it can also expand the mystery. Learning that the environment contains a particular danger does not explain why the environment exists. Discovering a pattern does not necessarily reveal the force behind the cosmic event. Each answer can open a larger question. This is where The End of Oak Street leans into the tradition of mystery-driven science fiction, rather than presenting its premise as a simple delivery system for creatures and action. The unknown has to remain active. The audience should feel that the world contains information the characters have not yet reached, and perhaps cannot fully comprehend. But that approach also creates a demanding balance. Too much explanation can shrink the mystery. Too little movement can shrink the adventure. Part of the film's ambition lies in trying to maintain both. The characters need to pursue something concrete enough for the narrative to move forward, while the larger cosmic questions remain unresolved. That is a difficult combination because viewers naturally want answers, especially once a premise establishes something as enormous as the physical displacement of an entire neighborhood. The story is strongest when it allows answers to matter at the human level before attempting to solve everything at the cosmic level. The Platts do not necessarily need to understand the entire universe to understand that one route is safer than another. They do not need a complete scientific theory to recognize a pattern in the behavior of a
See anything
creature.
out there?
They can make discoveries that help them survive while remaining profoundly ignorant about the event that placed them there. That distinction keeps the mystery connected to character. The question of why can wait. The question of what to do next cannot. And as the family moves deeper into the demands of survival, fear begins exposing different parts of their personalities. Extreme circumstances do not invent character from nothing. They reveal tendencies that were easier to ignore when life was stable. The cautious person may become controlling. The confident person may become reckless. The curious person may become indispensable or endangered. The quiet person may suddenly become the one who notices what everyone else misses. The family members begin to learn things about one another that ordinary life never forced them to confront. That is one of the most emotionally rewarding possibilities in the survival genre. External danger can become the pressure that reveals internal truth. A creature attack or a dangerous expedition matters more when it changes the relationships among the people involved. If a sequence of danger ends exactly where the characters began emotionally, then spectacle risks becoming repetitive. But if survival forces someone to trust differently, to admit fear, to accept help, or to challenge an old assumption about another family member, then the external adventure leaves a permanent mark. The prehistoric threats are therefore not separate from the family drama. They create the conditions in which the family has to redefine itself. That redefinition is rarely smooth. There may be moments when the instinct to protect becomes a source of conflict. An adult may make a decision believing that secrecy or control will reduce danger, only to discover that withholding information creates another kind of vulnerability. Someone may resent being treated as incapable. Someone else may feel abandoned when a decision requires separation. Under pressure, even good intentions can collide. And because the environment offers no easy escape, those conflicts cannot simply be postponed. The family has to deal with one another while dealing with the world. That is where the narrative begins to gain another level of intensity. The external danger keeps expanding, but the emotional space between the characters can become equally important. Survival requires cooperation, yet cooperation depends on communication. Communication becomes harder when everyone is exhausted. Fear makes people hear accusation where none was intended. Grief over the lost world can emerge as anger. The inability to explain the cosmic event can create frustration with anyone who appears to be taking action without enough certainty. The crisis therefore produces a painful paradox. The people need one another more than ever, while the pressure makes staying united more difficult than ever. That is a far more interesting definition of family unity than simple sentimental loyalty. Unity is not everyone standing together because the screenplay says family is important. Unity is something the characters repeatedly have to choose. Sometimes they choose it after disagreement. Sometimes they choose it after fear has made them say or do things they regret. Sometimes they choose it because isolation has become too dangerous. And sometimes the story's most important acts of courage may not involve confronting a creature at all. They may involve admitting that another person was right, asking for help, trusting someone else with responsibility, allowing a child to become part of the family's survival rather than treating them only as someone to be protected. These quieter changes can give meaning to the larger adventure. At the same time, the adventure cannot become entirely inward. The world outside Oak Street has to keep pressing against the characters, and the prehistoric environment offers the perfect mechanism for that pressure. Human beings can negotiate with one another. They can explain intentions. They can form alliances. A creature operates according to a different relationship with danger. It cannot be persuaded to respect the family's emotional needs. That indifference makes suspense more immediate. The characters have to observe behavior, learn patterns, and understand their own limitations. A survival situation rewards attention. The difference between danger and safety may be a sound, a movement, a track, or an environmental warning that someone notices too late. This is where filmmaking can make the audience feel trapped inside uncertainty. Framing can turn open space into vulnerability. A wide landscape may look beautiful until the eye begins searching it for movement. Silence can become a warning rather than an absence. Sound can announce a threat before the characters understand what they are hearing. Editing can delay information long enough for anticipation to become unbearable. And crucially, the creatures do not always need to dominate the frame. A creature feature often becomes more frightening when its presence is felt before it is fully understood. The audience may recognize a disruption in the environment before seeing the cause. Something stops moving. Birds disappear. A distant sound changes. The characters become alert, and because the audience has learned that this world contains prehistoric danger, even an apparently empty image acquires tension. What is outside the frame matters as much as what is inside it. That approach fits the film's larger science fiction mystery. The cosmic event itself is another enormous thing outside the frame of complete understanding. The characters can see its consequences without yet possessing the perspective necessary to see its whole shape. In both cases, suspense comes from incomplete vision. The family sees enough to know that danger exists, not enough to know its full extent. This can also explain why the collision between modern suburbia and prehistoric life has such strong visual potential. The production design is not simply creating two different settings. It is creating an argument through juxtaposition. A suburban object gains new meaning when placed against ancient life. A parked vehicle can suggest mobility, but also uselessness. A house can suggest security, but also fragility. A child's bedroom can suggest innocence, but also the terrifying persistence of ordinary life after innocence has been interrupted.
Stay close to me.
Human-made objects become markers of absence. They remind the audience that another world once existed around Oak Street. The environment becomes a visual memory of civilization, and that memory creates a sense of loss that no amount of creature spectacle can replace. The characters are not only fighting to remain alive. They are carrying the knowledge of what normal life felt like. They remember how unimportant certain things once seemed. A morning routine, a school day, a drive, a meal that did not have to be rationed, a conversation about a problem that now appears almost trivial compared with survival. But those ordinary experiences matter precisely because they are gone. The film's title becomes more emotionally resonant as this loss deepens. The end of Oak Street may not mean that every building has vanished. It may mean the end of Oak Street as a way of life. A place can survive physically while its meaning dies. That is the deeper disaster.
Stay with me.
The characters may one day find a path away from the prehistoric environment, but the experience cannot simply be erased. Even if return becomes possible, the people who entered the crisis would not be the same people who came out of it. Once you know how fragile normality is, can you ever return to it with the same innocence? The adventure, therefore, carries the potential for transformation rather than simple restoration. This is where the narrative's middle movement can become especially powerful. The initial objective of survival may slowly grow into something larger. The family needs more than temporary safety. They need understanding, direction, and some way of deciding what kind of people they will become inside this new reality. The discoveries they make begin to force difficult decisions. And difficult decisions reveal priorities. What is worth risking everything for? Is the goal to preserve the family exactly as it was, or to accept that survival requires everyone to change? How much danger can be accepted in the pursuit of answers? When does hope become courage, and when does it become denial? These are the questions that prevent the story from becoming merely a sequence of escalating threats. Every adventure requires movement, but meaningful movement comes from decisions. The characters should not simply run because something is chasing them. They should eventually be running toward or away from choices that define them. That is where the pressure of the prehistoric world can intersect with the larger mystery. Perhaps the environment begins revealing patterns that suggest Oak Street's displacement is part of something greater than the characters first understood. Perhaps signs within the new world force them to reconsider assumptions made during the initial shock. The narrative does not need to invent certainty where certainty has not yet been earned. What matters is the growing realization that the crisis has layers. The more the family learns, the more impossible the original event appears. And the more impossible it appears, the more dangerous the temptation becomes to surrender to confusion. This is one of the story's central psychological battles. Human beings need a sense of narrative. They need to believe that events lead somewhere. A catastrophe without explanation can feel unbearable because it threatens not only physical security but meaning itself. If the Platts cannot understand why this happened, they have to find another reason to keep moving. Family can become that reason. Not because family magically explains the universe, but because love can provide direction when explanation cannot. That idea is particularly effective in a science fiction adventure because it grounds enormous concepts in immediate emotion. Cosmic displacement is too large to experience directly as an individual human being. A frightened child is not. A disagreement between parents is not.
Stay right there.
The decision to leave safety in search of a missing answer is not. The intimate becomes the way the audience enters the immense. And Hathaway and Ewan McGregor's roles therefore carry narrative weight less through generic heroism than through the emotional burden of responsibility. The adults represent a generation trying to maintain a structure for the people around them, while that structure has collapsed everywhere else. Their strength, if the story earns it, comes not from possessing all the answers, but from continuing to act despite the absence of answers.
Still here.
The younger characters represent the future that this crisis is threatening to reshape. They have inherited a world they did not build and now have to survive consequences they could not predict. Their presence raises the stakes without requiring the story to reduce them to symbols. They are individuals experiencing fear, curiosity, loss, and change from perspectives different from those of the adults. The family dynamic becomes a small civilization, and like civilization itself, it can survive only if it adapts. That adaptation may be one of the strongest thematic links between the science fiction and prehistoric elements. Prehistoric creatures evoke deep time. They remind human beings that survival is never guaranteed by intelligence alone. Species adapt or disappear. Environments change. The world does not remain arranged for the convenience of those living in it. Oak Street has experienced its own sudden evolutionary crisis. The neighborhood was built for one environment and transported into another. The family was emotionally prepared for one kind of life and forced into another. Everything they knew has become either a resource, a memory, or a liability. And now the pressure is forcing them to adapt faster than they ever imagined possible. Yet adaptation is not the same as victory.
Stay with me.
That is an important distinction as the story's dangers intensify. Learning how to survive one creature does not make the entire environment safe. Finding one route does not reveal the way home. Resolving one family conflict does not eliminate the emotional damage caused by everything that has happened. Progress remains fragile. That fragility helps maintain suspense because the audience cannot assume that each achievement permanently reduces danger. In fact, an ambitious survival narrative often becomes more tense as the characters gain information. Ignorance is frightening, but knowledge can reveal how much worse the situation really is. The family may discover that the world is larger than they believed. The creatures may be more numerous than expected. The boundaries of safety may be temporary.
Keep moving.
The cosmic mystery may resist every simple explanation.
You see anything out there?
Stay with me.
I'm still here. Just one more thing.
What is that?
We have to move now.
Stay close to me.
I saw something move out there. Stay right there.
We have to move now.
I'm still here.
Stay with me.
Stay close to me. Stay right here.
We should just keep going. We need to move quickly.
I'm not leaving you.